Welcome back to the Happy Saver podcast. I'm Ruth, a personal finance blogger living in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And in this podcast, I just chat with a very diverse bunch of people and I learn their money story and then I condense it down so that you can hear helpful, relatable stories from Kiwis who are sharing their experiences about their personal finance in New Zealand. Thanks for letting me join you on your commute, your walk, your run, or while you get some jobs done around your house. Now this week I'm trying to keep it brief, so let's see if I can manage to do that. Righto, on with it. I've got another anonymous couple for you this week. Kiwis are becoming much more forthcoming about sharing the ins and outs of their personal finances, but are still hesitant to give their names. But I'm okay with that, and from the feedback I receive from listeners, so are you, because it's not so much about who the people are, it's what they're doing with their money that is helpful to you. I spoke with Marian, who was 50, in mid-August of 2025, and she in turn spoke on behalf of herself and her husband, Jon, who's 53. At that time, they were in the midst of preparing their house for sale in preparation for a move from the greater Wellington region down to Canterbury. Now, it's a big transition in many ways, but having both been born in the Netherlands, moving location is something this couple have regularly done throughout their lives, and Marian in particular enjoys the whole process of heading off to live in a new house and discover a new area. Today's episode actually gave me a fascinating insight into growing up and working in the Netherlands and how and why a couple would want to give all of that up to move to New Zealand. Born savers, these two have always had their eye on their wallet, and that simple habit of living on less than you make has certainly been a big part of their success today. But forays into using a financial advisor and investing in rental property didn't serve them well when they tried to take that next step into investing. It was really only when they stepped back and decided to educate themselves and manage their own index fund investments that they got off the side roads and onto the freeway to financial independence. And they are now at a point of change in their lives, moving to Te Waipounamu and stepping back from full-time work, all while still aiming to hit their financial goals. So, now that you know a little bit about them, but before we really get going, I've just got a quick message from today's fabulous sponsor. PocketSmith has many uses, and this one is close to my heart. As a blogger and podcaster, I manage my small business using it. You might manage a trust, rental income, or selling products. PocketSmith can easily do it all. Throughout the month, I categorise each financial move my business makes, and at the end of the tax year, PocketSmith consolidates all my financial transactions and assets into an organised, exportable format that I can share with my accountant. The more efficiently I can provide my financials to them, the faster they can complete my return, saving time and money and reducing errors. And let's not forget the biggest reason I'm a fan of this software, it lets me know exactly how my business is performing. If you want to supercharge your finances with PocketSmith, have we got a deal for you. Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of PocketSmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/The Happy Saver. That's pocketsmith.com/The Happy Saver. Despite having friends from the Netherlands myself and having visited just once, I didn't have much awareness about the dynamics of the place. Marian said that they both grew up in middle-class families where their parents owned their own homes, something that was common and affordable. Each of them grew up with a savings mentality that stays with them today, and the idea that if you wanted something, you had to work to earn the money to save and pay for it. While money was not talked about much at home, money lessons for all of us often come from observation instead, and Marian recalls her parents having an old metal box with half a dozen slots in it, and every week they would put money in each slot, which was meant for a specific purpose, the much more robust version of today's envelope system. She watched her parents save up and pay cash for stuff. Marian's parents covered her basic expenses, but they introduced the element of her managing her own money from the age of about 12. She began to receive pocket money and also started receiving a clothing allowance. If she knew she needed a coat for the coming winter, well, she quickly learned that she had to save up her allowance in preparation for that expense. And how did they come up with this clothing allowance figure? Well, she thinks that they worked out the annual amount that they'd been spending on her clothing, and then they just divided it by 12, a rough but handy guide to use. It was a similar scenario for Jon. He did receive monthly pocket money, and when he wanted something, he saved this money up, and his parents would actually often chip in a little more if they could see him getting close to his goal. Back in the 1980s and 1990s, credit cards didn't exist in the Netherlands, and they are still quite rare. So everyday spending is predominantly done on debit cards, where you are, of course, just spending your own money, watching it leave your bank account straight away. These days, she said, some might use a credit card for international holidays, but most people just use a debit card. And if you want to visit the Netherlands, Marian said it's actually still quite random which businesses will actually accept a credit card. The only thing you used to borrow money for was to buy a house. Both Marian and Jon were born in the 1970s, and they grew up in the height of the welfare state, where the government took care of you. She said that the Dutch pension system was, and still is, one of the best in the world, so for most citizens, there was no need to build up extra money for retirement because you would be provided with enough. While we might hear the words early retirement today and think that we were the first to dream up the concept, far from it. Marian explained that in the 1990s, when unemployment was high, the solution their government came up with was a scheme between employers and the government that made it possible for citizens to retire early, thereby freeing up jobs for younger people. So both of their fathers actually retired around the age of 56. I learned a few more things too, which I found quite interesting. If you got sick, say you developed cancer, so that you are financially supported, the employer was obligated to pay 70% of your wages for another 2 years. This meant that there was not a need for the likes of income protection insurance. Marian explained that over the years, this support has been trimmed back a bit, but they both very much grew up thinking that a government and employer supporting their citizens was the same all over the world. Marian's mum mostly parented full-time while her dad worked, and they bought a house with a mortgage, which they then paid off, plus they moved from a rural town to a bigger city to follow her father's career, meaning that he received a jump in income. But her parents divorced in the late 1980s when Marian was about 12, meaning, as is often the case, a big change to their situation. Her mum returned to work, albeit on a low income, but she received alimony, which is financial support paid by one former spouse to the other after a divorce. The purpose is to help the person who has a lower income become financially self-supported, often to compensate for career sacrifices made during the marriage or to maintain a similar standard of living. Plus, Marian's mum received a child support payment to support Marian directly up until she turned 18. In addition to this, Marian said that her mum would have also received some additional government support too from time to time. Now, in this way, after this divorce, her parents were able to each buy a home of their own, and even though her dad continued to be a high income earner, while things were tighter for her mum, and there was not much money for any extras, she was still able to afford her own home on a low income. Both Marian and Jon studied at university, and this tuition was mostly state-funded. Because Marian's dad was considered to be on a high income, Marian was actually ineligible for a student loan, so she was not allowed to take on debt. Instead, her father was required to pay her an allowance to cover her living costs. It sounded so different to Aotearoa. Jon is the youngest of 2 kids, and his parents didn't earn as much as Marian's, and this meant that Jon could get a benefit from the state to support his living expenses. But because he lived at home, more or less for free, and because of his savings mindset, he put it all into an interest-earning savings account. Plus, he was eligible for a student loan, so he got that and he put that into a savings account too. And upon graduation day, he didn't hesitate to pay off his student loan in full, but of course he got to keep the interest, so a small win, I'm sure. Now clearly this was not a country that had grown comfortable with being in debt. While Marian didn't work much during her high school years, Jon worked a lot, delivering magazines for 2 to 3 hours each weekend, and as he got older, taking over the distribution point for the morning paper in the village that he lived in. But by the time they each entered university, they were each able to make full-time study their full-time job. Jon studied a master's in mathematics, which took 5 years, and Marian did a bachelor in medical laboratory science, which took 4 years. And they both actually met in 1999 after they'd both finished studying. By the time they met, Jon was working as a software developer and had just bought his first property, a 50 square metre ground floor apartment, while Marian was flatting while working as a research scientist / medical technician. Her income was low, and buying a home of her own was not even on her radar. But house prices were going up rapidly at that time, and for Jon, his flat was basically the only thing that he could afford, she said. Marian had mentioned that mortgages could actually be quite high for homeowners, because at that time you could loan more than the value of your home. So Jon got a 110% mortgage with zero deposit, which kind of boggles the mind when you think about it. She said that back then they had some very interesting mortgage options that, in hindsight, were not always a great idea. She explained that Jon's mortgage structure was split between paying both interest and saving at the same time. So in effect, some of his payment went towards his mortgage, but the other part of his mortgage payment was paid into a mortgage savings account. So he both paid off interest and earned it at the same time. And she explained that the interest you pay on the mortgage and that you earn on the linked savings account were the same rate. So by the end of the mortgage term, which was typically 30 years, the accumulated savings would cover the mortgage. So Jon worked for a bank at that time too, so he did also receive a 30% discount on the interest rate. So, for example, a 5% rate would reduce to 3.5%, which was a great work perk. Another feature was the mortgage came with a life insurance policy. And in theory at least, he was meant to reach a point of equilibrium where your savings grow enough to pay off the mortgage. While good in theory, Marian doubted that this would have played out. She recalls that there was also a mortgage option that, instead of a savings account, you invested in shares, and she had a colleague who did this. He paid interest on his mortgage and paid a portion into investments that had a promised return. But even other people's investment disasters can leave a mark, and she recalls a share market crash where he lost it all, and he actually had to sell his house. Banks soon stopped selling this type of product, she said. So their paths crossed for the first time when they were in their mid-20s, and both ended up in Bolivia on a volunteering holiday, where each had signed up to a project to build classrooms at a school. She said that it took them just 3 weeks to meet, fall in love, and do some good in the world. And when they returned to their normal lives and jobs, they were living 30 kilometres apart, which to us here in Aotearoa is practically next door, but in the Netherlands, it's a lot. So within 6 months, in the year 2000, she moved in with him. Now, she can't recall any conversations about money, and she said that honestly, neither of them thought too hard about it. But they opened a joint bank account quickly and soon started depositing both of their incomes into it to pay the bills. Nor could she recall what they were earning, but his skills in particular were very sought after, leading up to and in the early 2000s. Neither of them were big spenders, meaning that they were pretty much on the same page. In hindsight, they might have been foolish to join finances so quickly. It could have gone horribly wrong, but 25 years on, it has not. Shortly after they met, in around 1999-2000, Jon tried to start investing, buying a managed fund, but he didn't keep it up. He was a tracker of his data, and he just couldn't deal with the daily fluctuations in his account balance. Later, together, they tried investing in individual stocks in the Netherlands, and once again, they just didn't have the stomach for watching the value of their investments fluctuate in real time. So they backed off, returning to saving with their bank. They married in 2001 and later decided to move to a quieter part of the Netherlands. So he sold his 50 square metre pad, so he never got to see if his mortgage structure would work out as planned, and they bought a terraced house that they could afford. And they stayed in that home for the next 7 years before deciding to move to New Zealand in 2010. During the years, house values barely increased, but because the mortgage was part interest only and partly linked to a savings account, over the years, any spare money had been used to increase their contributions into the savings account portion first, up to the maximum allowable level each year. Any money left went into paying off the interest-only part of the mortgage, meaning that by the time they sold, they had saved up quite a bit of money and created equity in their home. I think that a lot of Kiwis miss the point sometimes that house prices don't always go up in the time frame you want them to. But if you continue to pay down your mortgage instead of just paying interest, you own more of your home, meaning that when you sell, you come out with more money. For Jon and Marian, from the get-go, they both saved, avoided and paid down debt, two habits that really helped them grow wealth. This is why interest-only mortgages can be risky. If you buy a $500,000 house and only pay interest, then later sell it for the same $500,000, you walk away with nothing except the deposit you put in. Your equity hasn't grown, you've just paid the bank. By making principal and interest payments, you steadily build ownership in your home. That way, if prices stagnate, you still leave with cash in hand. And if they rise, you benefit twice through equity and capital gains. And also, you are less stressed when house prices don't move. They have always sought to try to make their money work for them. And Marian recounted how she and Jon nearly lost all their savings in 2008 after chasing a 5% interest rate with an Icelandic bank that later went bankrupt. They went offshore because 5% was a better rate than they could get at home. Although the depositor guarantee scheme eventually reimbursed them, it took 6 to 9 months of stressful paperwork. The experience taught them that even savings accounts carry risk and that too good to be true offers usually are. She's pleased New Zealand now has a depositor compensation scheme in effect, so that if a deposit taker fails, each depositor will be covered up to $100,000. You can go to the Reserve Bank website for more information on this. Now, during this stressful time in the Netherlands, they were applying for visas to move to New Zealand, but getting their money back in full took priority over moving here, so it did delay their move. It seems to me from speaking with Marian and from the reading that I've done, the Netherlands offers a balanced lifestyle with fair wages, it's got strong social support and accessible healthcare plus education. It seems to me that flexible work, generous holidays where you can visit so many neighbouring countries make it easier to save while still enjoying life, and it is often described as a place where you can build security without giving up quality of living. The Netherlands was sounding like a pretty good place to live to me, so why did they want to upend their lives and move here? Well, she said that in reality, the Netherlands is the size of Canterbury, but with 20 million people, and it was feeling increasingly busy and populated. Friends and acquaintances were often stressed and feeling rushed, with a simple coffee date being scheduled 3 weeks in advance, leaving very little room for spontaneity. They wanted a more relaxed atmosphere and more nature about them, and having been out here on holiday previously, moving here had been playing on their minds for a number of years. They actually also applied for a visa with Canada, but New Zealand won out due to our weather. Via online forums and blogs, they met some people online, and as is the Kiwi way, the offer of a small cabin to rent in the lower North Island was enough to seal the deal. So they sold up their home and they came to New Zealand in 2010 with no jobs, but changing their euros for New Zealand dollars, getting almost $2 for every euro, gave them a financial bump and incentive to come over and make do until they could work out their next steps. For 5 months, they lived off their savings, purely having a look around their new country for the first couple of months, living frugally and checking out the working scene here. And much like in episode 110 that I did with Gail recently, it was hard to find that first job in New Zealand. So it was a 6-month work contract that brought them down to Dunedin, which was a city that they loved, but considering they came to New Zealand, no offence Dunedin, because it's an awesome city, they never found the consistent warmth that they were looking for. Moving up to Christchurch was their preferred option, but the Canterbury earthquakes coincided exactly with job interviews that he had lined up there. So, thinking that it may take a while to settle down, they decided to look further north instead. And the next work contract he took saw them head up to the Wellington region in about 2011. Having lived in both Dunedin and Wellington myself, I'm not so sure that there was too much difference in the weather. Well, over the next year or two, Jon picked up year-long contracts and they continued to settle into New Zealand. While in the Netherlands, Marian had worked in HR-type roles, but New Zealand employers wouldn't consider her for positions because she didn't have the knowledge of New Zealand law that they were looking for. So when Jon started working, so did Marian, but she ended up settling into administration and accounts-type work for various companies instead. However, while he worked full-time, she worked part-time. The 2 years of full-time work she did straight out of university had made her never want to work full-time if she could avoid doing so. If she had to, she would, and she has, but she has a life to live too. So, by design, almost all of her jobs have been 20 to 30 hours a week. She explained that in the Netherlands, full-time work was 36 hours, worked in 4 9-hour days, which leaves time to live life too. But in New Zealand, Jon had to go to a 40-hour, 5-day working week. She has done full-time stints too, but for Marian, she always aimed for part-time jobs, and 3 days a week tends to be her happy place, she said. Now, a key thing is that they have always lived off Jon's income and saved all of hers. So financially, they could always manage with her working reduced hours for each employer. In her mind, there was no need to work 5 full days, so why do it when doing so would only make her miserable? Marian and I are very much on the same page here, and I agree. If you don't have to work full-time, well, why would you? Because she had a little more time of her own, and because you can't keep an active mind down, on the side she set up an online advisory business of her own, and when she was made redundant from her job at one point, she decided to focus on her side hustle instead. For about 4 years, she did work full-time on it, before pulling back to part-time. Having created a global network of contacts, she still works for herself today. It seems to me that this is a real benefit to New Zealand when others move to this country, but maintain and build income internationally that they can then spend in New Zealand. Sometimes her hours start to creep up, but then they settle down. And during COVID, it sometimes stopped entirely. But given they lived off his income and saved hers, they were much better able to cope with her income fluctuations. In 2012, they felt settled enough to purchase their first house in New Zealand. Having sold their home in the Netherlands and brought that money here, they were able to buy an 800 square metre section for $150,000 and build a 108 square metre house for about $200,000, so about $350,000 all in, and they paid cash for this. And because it seems that people the world over are the same, in about 2016, they moved to a bigger house. That's the pathway, it seems. They sold their home for $400,000 and again they decided to build. This time they built a much bigger 180 square metre home on a 2,000 square metre section. All in, it cost them about $450,000. So they used the equity from their house sale plus some savings and they remained mortgage-free. During this period, he was earning about $80,000 a year gross and she was earning about $40,000 a year gross. So what did they do with that income? Well, with no clear financial goal in mind, they just kept saving their money. But at around that time, they did start to realise that they may need to have additional money saved for retirement, as a New Zealand fortnightly superannuation payment alone may not be enough when they retired at 65. Apart from their attempts at investing back in the very early 2000s and another foray into investing around 2008, they had little experience with investing. Now in New Zealand, they knew about KiwiSaver, but they didn't join immediately, choosing to opt out for the first couple of years, even though they were eligible to join, because they were not sure if they were going to stay here in Aotearoa, and they didn't like that their investment was locked in till 65. But after being here about 3 years, in around 2013, they did join. And now, even all these years later, if they do choose to leave New Zealand at some point, there is paperwork involved, but you can take your KiwiSaver with you. In 2012, their minds started to turn to making their money work a little harder for them because they had savings in the bank, but the interest payments were low. She estimates that they had somewhere around $50,000 to $75,000 to invest. They found a financial advice firm who asked them to fill out the standard risk profile questionnaire without making them understand the difference between risk and volatility, which would have come back as saying they were conservative investors. They suggested a range of managed funds to Jon and Marian, predicting a return of about 7%, which was better than the bank, and then they just duly invested their money on their behalf. But the 2 annual reports they received showed that they never saw those estimated returns, and their gut instinct was telling them that something didn't feel quite right either. They made something, but not a lot, and they looked at the returns they got and the fees that they paid, concluding quite correctly that the return was less than what they said it might be, but still they paid handsomely for it. I asked what didn't feel right, and she said it was something about the advisor that they used. They just didn't feel like they were acting in their best interest, but were instead trying to get them to invest more and more money. Marian and Jon had read the annual reports carefully, which showed a lot of buy-sell fees, and they wondered why their advisor was buying and selling stuff all the time. They didn't know what was not right, but they didn't stick around to find out. They pulled all of their money out, and sadly, that experience put them off investing for quite a while. It just felt too complicated to do themselves. Just on that comment about buying and selling stuff all the time, there is money to be made by financial advisors buying and selling investments for their clients because they can clip the ticket every time a transaction is made. Plus, there is often a funds under management fee charged, which is why you will either see advisors pushing you to invest more or just flat out refusing to work with clients who they deem don't have enough money to invest. So, what do you do in New Zealand if share market investing seems too difficult to navigate? Well, you buy an investment property instead, of course, which is exactly what they did in 2018. To purchase their $250,000 rental property in a smaller North Island town, they took on a $150,000 mortgage, but her memories were a bit sketchy. She thinks it was an interest-only mortgage, where half of their mortgage was on a fixed rate and half of it on floating. Why this structure, I asked. No idea, but most probably because the mortgage advisor advised them to. They also paid to use a property manager to deal with the tenant, collect the rent, and manage the property. But for every little thing that went wrong, the property manager contacted Marian and Jon, and they just got so sick and tired of the phone calls for the tiniest of things. Being landlords was simply not for them. They realised they wanted a set and forget investment, and property is anything but that. So, just 2 years later, in 2020, they sold that property for $310,000. I asked, did they feel this was a financial success? Well, in some ways, yes. The rent covered the expenses with a little left over, and they made a profit on the sale. But with a lot of their own money in it, she concluded that the return on equity was probably not that great, and nor was being a landlord. Here is a couple with the right idea, that they want to grow wealth, but are just unsure how to do it. They are trying different avenues, looking to others for advice and expertise, and searching for different information, putting their money on the line, but still not feeling they have stumbled upon a way for them to grow wealth in a way that they understand and feel comfortable. But still, they didn't give up, and they kept looking. And it was in the latter half of 2020 that the concept of FIRE, or financial independence, retire early, popped up, a concept that once they looked into it appealed to both of them. Now, FIRE is a lifestyle movement where people aggressively save and invest so that they can reach financial independence sooner and have the freedom to stop working decades before the traditional retirement age. This concept sounded well worth investigating. Marian had 2 friends who were into it already. One was a few steps further ahead than Marian, but still new to the idea, and the other was well on their way to financial independence and retiring early. Pretty quickly, Marian started reading and learning about it, and it was talking to Jon about it too that really got the ball rolling. Still, in mid-2020, they had visited another financial advisor, but this one was legitimately a very qualified financial advisor who charged an upfront fee and who created a financial plan for them to follow themselves, meaning that Marian and Jon managed all of their own investments. They told him that they wanted to retire earlier than 65, and now in their mid-40s, they felt their time frame was getting shorter. Now, based on their annual expenses at that time, they came up with an investment plan that could see them retire by the ages of 56 and 57. With no kids, so no need to leave any money behind, they devised a plan to basically use up all the money they would end up investing during their lifetime. Their financial advisors suggested that they invest in index funds, also known as ETFs, which is how they really got started on deeply researching FIRE and the 4% rule and working out just how much money they would need invested to make it all work. Their learning started with Mr. Money Mustache, Your Money or Your Life, Quit Like a Millionaire, The Millionaire Next Door, and Choose FI. They found The Happy Saver and they watched the movie Playing with Fire. And finally, they read The Simple Path to Wealth. And based on this new knowledge, gleaned from their financial advisor, their two friends, and these various resources, they now felt that they had the knowledge and the courage to put the proceeds from the sale of the investment property into index or ETF funds. Now that they had a direction to head in, they really focused hard on saving up cash. And in 2021, they also decided to sell the home that they had built because it was just too big for them. Fortunate timing meant it was a seller's market, and they were able to buy a small plot of land for a future build. But they ended up selling this plot within a year into a hot property market for a great profit, and they bought a lifestyle block to build a small home on instead, and this allowed them to invest a larger amount. After clearing the mortgage on the rental property, they came out with about $250,000 cash, and from downsizing their home, they freed up another $200,000. So in total, about $450,000 went straight into their index fund investment. In addition to this, they saved even harder. In 2022, they built their new, smaller, 95 square metre home, plus a studio for visitors, and all in, including house and land, they spent about $750,000, all cash on their new, slightly rural property. It's a bold move to chop and change dwellings and build new homes, but Marian and Jon enjoy the process. They like designing new houses and they like being in a new home. But she also enjoys moving houses, and because she doesn't stay too long in a home, she doesn't get emotionally attached. Instead, she gets excited about exploring new homes and new areas, which is why now, in 2025, this home is on the market in preparation for a move to Te Waipounamu, the South Island. After over a decade in the North Island, which they have really enjoyed, the idea to go somewhere else had been on their minds, so they decided to move to Canterbury, a place they had almost moved to once before, but the Canterbury earthquakes pushed them up north instead. But a change of scene was not the only motivating factor. Work and career have played a role too, particularly for Jon. Jon was actually made redundant from the New Zealand company he was working for in August of 2024, losing an annual salary of about $100,000 a year gross. And although he applied for roles and had lots of interviews, it was a really competitive job market and he missed out. He had always been the main income provider, and then suddenly he wasn't, making for a pretty uncertain time in his life. He received a redundancy payout, which they really stretched out and made last for the 4 to 5 months until he managed to secure a full-time job. Battening down the hatches and being incredibly mindful of spending during a time like this is a crucial thing to do. The twist was that his next job was actually back in the Netherlands, so at the start of 2025, he returned there for 5 months while Marian stayed here in New Zealand, earning about $60,000 gross herself. To bring in extra income, they also Airbnb'd the guest studio on their property up to about 15 nights each month, making about $1,000 a month net. I really like how they have managed to create various income streams because doing so relieves pressure. Now, this big change was the trigger to ask themselves if they wanted something else from life. Going back there to the Netherlands was a test of sorts to see if Jon would actually prefer to return to the Netherlands full-time, where work was obviously easier to come by. Marian was also open to moving back there if they both felt it was the right thing to do. And there is nothing like immersing yourself in a place to work out what sits well with you. While Marian continued life as normal here, Jon found that the work mentality, productivity, and pressure to work in the Netherlands was much higher than Aotearoa. And it's not that he's afraid of hard work by any stretch, but after a lot of thought, he concluded that he didn't want to remain there. They left for a reason all those years ago, and not much had changed. He wanted to be here in New Zealand, enjoying the life this country offers, which is pretty fortunate because while he was away and thinking about things, so was Marian, and she was thinking that she wanted to remain here in New Zealand. As a testament to the strength of their relationship, where each has their own say, they each had to decide on their own terms what they each wanted. Neither pressured the other to make a decision on whether to stay or to go. Instead, each of them used the unique experiences they were having, with him working and living overseas and her living and working here, to ultimately come to their own conclusions and then sit down and compare notes. Their collective experience was the trigger to say that they wanted something else, something different, but returning to the Netherlands was not the difference that they were seeking. They had plenty of calm and rational discussion about what he values more, high income and high-level job overseas, or living in New Zealand with a different kind of occupation and lifestyle. They had a lot of conversations, Marian said, and these conversations continue. So he returned to New Zealand mid-year, and since then, he's picked up a 20-hour-a-week contract working remotely from New Zealand for a company in the Netherlands. With working reduced hours and his workplace being his home office, it means he can work from anywhere, as can Marian, and this made their decision to have a change of scenery just so much easier. However, seeing how insecure his employment has become, and because they were now talking about financial independence and the ability to retire early, conversations also opened up about the possibility to work less or stop working sometime in the very near future. The thought of not working brought up new conversations and new feelings. For Marian, she said that if she could stop working tomorrow, she would. But for her husband, his identity is tied up with his job, and it's taken him some time to come to terms with the thought of stopping working less, or working in a different occupation entirely. This is a very real and common situation for many men and women. Who are you if you don't have a job title? And who are you if you work at a job that you might consider yourself overqualified to do? One of the hardest questions an early retiree has to try to answer is when a stranger asks them, "What do you do?" It takes time to adjust and understand that if you reply nothing much, it doesn't mean you are nothing. So, as a way to explore life after a long-term career in a single industry, this curious couple explored new ideas for Jon when he did something completely different and picked up extra work at a winery for a while, working at the cellar door. And he apparently actually enjoyed it, and it opened his mind up to other opportunities, and he saw not working in the same industry as less of a problem. For all of 2025, Jon has been on a journey of trying things out, adjusting to working differently, working less, and coming to terms with that. It has been a gradual process that is still ongoing. Neither railroads the other into making the decision. Instead, they feel they're on the same page, but each works through things differently and at their own pace. Ultimately, while Marian was relieved that Jon wanted to stay here in New Zealand, they would have worked through it either way. And honestly, these two could run a masterclass on how to communicate in a marriage. All of these work threads, thoughts and dreams cemented their thoughts that they both wanted to stay in New Zealand but move region, and that both of their working situations are very open to change. When Marian and I spoke, their future was excitedly uncertain. Their property was on the market and they were hoping to sell it for over $800,000. The final sale price of their home would dictate what they spent on a home in Canterbury, but they are anticipating spending about $700,000 and buying without a mortgage. However, staying mortgage-free is both by choice and by circumstance. Given she works for herself, and given his income comes from overseas and is paid in euros, it is hard to find a bank that would lend to them, she said. And so that they were not arriving in Canterbury blind, they spent 3 weeks in the region getting acquainted with the property market and working out what area they would like to live in. As soon as they have a sale confirmed on their home, they plan to seriously go house shopping with the intention of buying. And having built a few times before, I asked if they intended to do the same again. So yes, they do, but not yet. Their intention is to buy a house in an area that they like, that will do them well for the next 2 to 3 years, and then build or buy another house after that time. Marian considers their first house as a temporary measure to keep them in the property market. When they buy and move into their new home, Marian intends to continue working for herself, and Jon will continue with his 20-hour per week contract, and currently the exchange rate has been favourable, and 1 month of Jon's income will cover about 2.5 months of their expenses. Which brings me neatly to money. They have come a long way quickly and are positioning themselves to semi-retire soon. I hope I'm managing to portray here that they have a number of moving parts that they are jostling into position, and they can't have a rock-solid plan because, It has quite a few moving parts, but they are moving in all areas in the general direction that they want to go. Marian said that they had been using a budgeting app called YNAB for about 10 years to know exactly how much they were spending. And when it closed down last year, they transitioned straight to actualbudget.org, which popped up to take its place. They also made a spreadsheet where they forecast their annual projected net worth. Using this projection, they calculated how much they would need invested to stop working earlier. They have not reached their full-time FIRE number of $1.2 million invested in the share market yet. That full sum invested could spin off enough income to cover their annual expenses, which are currently $48,000 a year. But they are working hard towards this goal. Marian explained that initially their first investments were spread over several index funds with a mix of 80% in share index funds and 20% in bond funds. But since that time, her outlook on investing changed quite a bit due to reading a lot about financial independence and index investing in general. So at the moment, all of their money is invested in the Total World Fund Index Fund. They have about $200,000 with Superlife and about $600,000 with InvestNow. Plus, they are each in KiwiSaver. Jon's KiwiSaver has a $100,000 balance and is in a Fisher Funds Growth Fund, and Marian has $30,000 in her KiwiSaver in a Superlife Growth Fund. The reason hers is so low is because she has been self-employed for so long. Her balance has grown only because of the time spent as an employee before moving to self-employment, plus the $1,042 she continues to contribute to get the small annual government contribution of just $260 a year. They currently also hold about $100,000 in cash in the bank, as they are planning to start spending that money next year. Ideally, she said, they want the cash to grow to $150,000, and they plan to top this up to that amount using money from the sale of their current home. Now, I've alluded to their ability to save a few times. Since becoming more financially educated, they've added about $40,000 to $50,000 a year to their investments in a variety of ways, and it all adds up over time. Initially, they always saved her full income in the bank, but now they invest that income. Investing any of his income left over after covering their expenses is also a thing. They have also invested lump sums of money from house sales, plus, of course, they are each paying into their KiwiSavers. Plus, living below their means and being invested in rising share markets over the last 5 years means that since starting on their path to FIRE, this couple currently have $930,000 invested, plus that $100,000 of cash in the bank and a property that they own outright. If you were to exclude that cash in the bank and apply the 4% rule to the $930,000 that they have invested, both inside and outside of their KiwiSaver, technically they could sell 4% or $37,000 of their investments each year and use that money as income. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a good guide. This would leave them a gap of about $11,000 between what they spend and what they could draw from their investments, and they feel well able to work and earn enough to cover that small gap. Or the $100,000 that they have in the bank could be used for this purpose too. I asked if they would consider selling closer to 5% than 4%, but that was a firm no, given they are not quite where they want to be yet. They are aiming to grow their investments to $1.2 million, which will then be able to provide them with their full annual expenses of $48,000. They plan to still work a little to cover travel. By managing their money this way, Marian and Jon have given themselves options. They have levers that they can pull to adjust their course. She said that they knew for a few years what their financial independence number was, but they only realised after finishing up the online course called Rebel Finance School in December of 2024 that there are many ways to FIRE and retire. Realising that they could partially FIRE took a lot of financial pressure away after Jon lost his job in 2024 and then had an unsuccessful search for a new one in New Zealand. Although they had been loosely tracking their net worth since 2020, when they began using a spreadsheet provided by Rebel Finance School, it showed them that they were much closer to full FIRE than they realised. Information is power at a time like this, and it made them feel less vulnerable. There are many adjustable variables in their situation. They could choose to spend less than $700,000 on their next home and invest the spare money. Their current house sale might go gangbusters, and they might get more than they hoped, and they could invest that money. They can flex their budget to adapt to current income. They can work more if they want to, or entirely stop work for a period. And they can continue to forecast future income and returns and the impact that receiving superannuation at 65 will have on that. So many good options, all of them workable. And Marian has come a very long way in how she feels about investing in the share market. What she is now doing would have unsettled her greatly 10 years ago. Thinking way back to the year 2000 when Jon bought managed funds, and then they both tried buying individual company shares, which they followed daily, well, it stressed her out. But these days, she's as cool as a cucumber. She invests regularly, but doesn't follow the fluctuations of the stock market. Yes, she hears the odd thing, but she doesn't need to watch it. And feeling comfortable with investing in the share market is a huge deal. She figured that she had money invested in KiwiSaver, and that didn't bother her. So why should having money invested in a similar type of investment elsewhere bother her? It's the same thing. Her mind has shifted, she said, and it came from reading about financial independence and from looking at historical share market performance. And although there are no guarantees, if you zoom right out and look at the share market over time for the last 50 to 100 years, it always goes up. With the cost of living rising, particularly in 2025, we dug more deeply into their monthly budget, which sees them spend about $4,000. They have no mortgage, but they do have a lot of other outgoings which they budget for. The amounts I'm about to share are not exact, but they are the amount they budget to spend each month. When it comes to insurance, etc., they budget 10 to 20% more than what they spent in the previous year to deal with price increases, which they are pretty sure will be coming. So for groceries, they budget about $600 a month. For fuel, they spend about $245. Their mobile phone, well, just $30 a month. But their internet is about $55 a month. They budget to spend about $200 a month on cafes, restaurants, or just general recreation. Their power needs just $50 a month given they installed solar on their house. They budget to pay $375 for health insurance and a further $335 for house, contents and car insurance. They allow about $250 a month to cover car maintenance, warranty fitness and rego expenses, and they budget to spend about $120 a month on their pets. Their council rates are $305 a month. Their regular budgeted expenses, some of which I've just mentioned, total up to roughly $3,070 a month, plus they also put money aside into sinking funds for various things like future car updates, a holiday, and replacing various bits of electronics or furniture or whiteware that will inevitably wear out. Sinking funds are just the present-day equivalent of the old tin box with its separate sections for saving that Marian's parents used to put money into each week. They have a veggie garden and a lot of fruit trees, which offsets their grocery spend, plus they don't eat a lot of meat, just once or twice a week, which keeps costs down. They enjoy a cafe visit just once a week, and also they don't drink at home, instead only at a bar or a restaurant when they eat out once a month. A common trend of those on the path to financial independence that I've noticed is that eating outside of the home has become the exception, not the norm, with eating out becoming a treat to really look forward to. And I think all that brings me nicely to beginning to close out this episode. But before I wrap up, I've just got another quick message from today's sponsor. If your finances are holding you back from living the life you want, try PocketSmith out. They've got the tools to help you make money management easier. And have we got a deal for you? Happy Saver listeners get a whopping 50% off your first 2 months of PocketSmith's foundation plan. To get your deal, go to pocketsmith.com/The Happy Saver. That's pocketsmith.com/The Happy Saver. Marian said that they always made relatively good choices prior to learning about the opportunity to retire early, but hindsight is 2020. She said that they spent a lot of money that, had they known about fire earlier, they could have invested more sooner, and they would have been fired by now. But I am yet to meet a person who doesn't have that same regret of starting earlier. I have exactly the same regret, but hopefully by sharing all the stories that I do, fewer people will have the same regret. When we spoke, they were at a transitional stage and the future sounded pretty good to me. So once they have settled in Te Waipounamu, what does the future look like for these two? Well, with share market growth over time and a currently unknown lump sum amount from the house sale going into their investments, they are drawing rapidly closer to the point of not needing to add any more money to their investments. And this relieves the pressure on Jon to find work beyond the end of his current contract. What Marian earns is enough. They have the ability to methodically wind back their working hours and take full control of their transition into semi-retirement. That is a powerful position to be in, and I really congratulate them for this. Jon will no doubt want to do something, but neither is sure what that might look like yet, but it will be something ranging from complete retirement for him or part-time work in an area that he enjoys. We all need to find a purpose, but it doesn't always need to earn an income, and Jon and Marian have given themselves the ability to pursue their future purpose. With the job market in New Zealand currently being really tough, it might be that he doesn't want to feel the sense of rejection that comes from a job search. So the choice to not have to work might lead them instead to all sorts of interesting things, paid or otherwise. Travel to new places is something that's very much on their minds because it's slowed to a crawl since moving down under all those years ago, and their precious annual leave was spent flying home to family at great expense, something that many new New Zealanders always have to contend with. With a whole new island to explore and summer rapidly approaching, there are plenty of opportunities to travel close to home as well. Marian will continue to work until they reach their full fire number, which is also dependent on how their investments go. Plus, she may continue to scale her hours up and down for a little longer, just so they can ride out those first few years of retirement, just in case share markets drop. Once again, they know they have the ability to be flexible, picking up or giving up work as they need to. Now, I am always amazed but no longer surprised by just how quickly people in New Zealand can turn their financial situation around once they find their way. These two have built wealth via capital gains in property, contributions to KiwiSaver, and from steady savings into their bank. But it was getting a clearer direction on what to invest in instead of saving with the bank that has really given them a leg up. Their plan is pretty simple. They always own their home, they have cash in the bank for short-term expenses, and they invest the rest into a simple indexed investment fund, from which in time they can sell off a small sum each year to cover their annual expenses. Given they keep a close eye on both their annual expenses and the value of their investments, they will know when the time is right to retire. The real turning point came when Marian and Jon started to create the life they wanted, and they sought advice, but completely took over managing their own money, and now they get to decide where the future is going to take them, which is very, very exciting. So finally, thank you so much, Marian and Jon, for sharing all that you have, and I'm looking forward to stopping in for a coffee the next time we are up in Canterbury. So that is all from me this week. Now, if you want to get in touch, you know that you can find me at thehappysaver.com. And please do share my podcast and blog with your friends. It's the best way that I can help other people learn something new about money. And finally, I would love it if you would talk more about money with your own friends and whānau and help me continue to help others be better with money. So until next time, happy saving.